I'm on a journey through one of the most intoxicating places on Earth, filled with beautiful seas, fantastic beaches, amazing food, bucket loads of myth, breathtaking sights, and endless amounts of history. I've been coming to Greece for many years to explore its rich and diverse culture, history, and landscape. In this series, we'll journey across mainland Greece and the islands of the Aegean over millennia of history and encounter the enticing characters, communities, and places that help shape what Greece is today. A place to talk, to think, to dance, to laugh, to cry, and ultimately, to understand what being alive is really all about. I'm looking forward to showing you around my Greece. I'm Dr. Michael Scott, and welcome to This is Greece. Welcome to Athens, laid out below us from this extraordinary vantage point, Lycabettos Hill. Now, the name comes from ancient times. It means Wolf Hill, when this place was wild nature. But thankfully, the modern city of Athens has expanded to tame it. We'll be exploring this wonderful city in this program. It's now home to over half of Greece's population, but at its center, always, the Acropolis and the wonderful Parthenon. And of course, the Aegean Sea shimmering out in the distance. I love this city. Let's go and explore.
Athens, in many ways the cradle of the modern world. The architecture, literature, science and philosophy of the ancient Greeks established the template for what a civilized nation should be. Even the mythology of ancient Greece is steeped in our collective consciousness to this day. The old gods may be dead, but they are far from forgotten.
What I love about coming up here is that you can finally get a sense of this vast city. At the center of it all, the Acropolis and the Parthenon standing for over 2,500 years. And the green area below it, well, that's the extent of the ancient city of Athens. It never had a population of more than about 200,000 people. Down there, too, is the area of Plaka. That's the sort of 19th century build of Athens. Beautiful buildings, well worth a visit and a nice walk. Everything else, the white apartment blocks mushrooming out in every direction, well, that's happened pretty much since the 1950s or 60s. Friends of mine who live here in Athens, their parents owned land here in the city that, when they were born, was open farming land. And today, that same land is some of the most densely populated living space in the whole of Europe.
The imposing Lycabettos Hill, according to mythology, it was created by the goddess Athena, and its peak once bore a temple dedicated to Zeus.
This city is wonderful, but it can begin to feel just too intense, too overwhelming. And if it does, take a break. Come up here to Lycabettos Hill and feel like the gods on Mount Olympus overlooking it all. I always love thinking about a particular quote that describes Athens, written by a guy called Pindar in the 5th century BC. He wrote poems about wonderful places and wonderful people. And this is how he describes Athens. O shining violet crown, song-famed bulwark of Greece, illustrious Athens, city of the gods.
After centuries of rule by the Roman, Byzantium, and then the Ottoman empires, Greece finally gained its independence in 1832. Athens, appropriately, and despite being little more than a town at the time, was declared the new capital of the nation.
When we first arrived in Athens, we went up to Lycabettos Hill that you can see over there for that Mount Olympus divine-like view out over the whole city. And now we've come in amongst it. The Acropolis is just over there, and we're going to be exploring this thriving place. But before we do, I want to give you a few words to live by and certainly to enjoy your journey through Greece by, that always stick with me whenever I travel through this country. And they're those of a modern Greek poet, Cavafy, whose poem Ithaca is very, very well known. And it starts like this. When you set out on the voyage to Ithaca, Ithaca, the home of Odysseus from the Odyssey, the great epic of ancient Greece, when you set out on the voyage to Ithaca, pray that your journey may be long, full of adventures, full of knowledge. I hope your journey around Greece is exactly the same.
Today, the once royal palace of King Otto is home to the Greek Parliament. And Syntagma Square, which means Constitution Square in English, commemorates this transition from independence to monarchy and finally to a republic. As such, the square has become both the geographical and ideological heart of the city.
Well, this is Syntagma Square. It feels a pretty relaxed place to enjoy a coffee now, but this is the same place that we've seen on our TV screens where the Greeks have gathered to protest violently, particularly against the recent economic crisis. This is where the Greeks come to make their voices heard. And when you first see a protest here, it can be quite a shock. They're violent. The Greek police are in full riot gear. Tear gas is often used. But when you've been in the city for a while, these protests actually become part of the rhythm of Greek life. And to understand why protest is so much in the lifeblood of the Greeks, you need to just think for a moment about their history. And that history is one of occupation and continual need to protest against the ruling parties. Greece was under the Ottoman Turks from the 15th to the 19th centuries. And even then, after their independence, it wasn't a smooth ride. The first Greek monarchy was kicked out in the 1860s. They were back in the 1920s and tried to form a dictatorship. Then, during the Second World War, Greece was occupied by the Nazis. After the war, the interim government ended up turning into civil war. And then even in the 50s and 60s, Greece became the front line against the US fight against communism, which resulted in 1960s in a military junta being imposed on the country, which led even to the murder of Greek university students protesting, killed by the Greek army. And it really is only since the late 1970s that Greece has had a stable, elected, accountable democratic government for a continual period of time. That's why, when the Greeks protest, they do it because it is part of the Greek soul.
King Otto was crowned as the first monarch of modern Greece, an interesting choice for a country that practically invented democracy so many centuries before, especially as the new king was still a teenager at the time.
The building behind me, which will have graced many news reports in recent months, is Greece's Parliament building. And it's been the Parliament since 1934. But before that, it was actually the palace of Greece's ruling monarchy. That was built back in 1834 after Greece became independent from the Ottoman Turks in the Greek War of Independence at the beginning of the 19th century. So this building has a long and complicated history, but it's most famous for the guys who are standing in front of it. These soldiers, immobile on either side by their boxes, are the Evzones. The Evzoni, they're members of Greece's army elite mountain brigades, and they're not actually here guarding Parliament. They're here guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier that's right in front of it. And they also guard the president, and they guard their own army barracks. Now, their outfit to us can look a little bit weird, but actually it's steeped in history. Their outfit, it descends from what the Greek revolutionary fighters wore in the Greek War of Independence from the Ottoman Turks at the beginning of the 19th century. And there are some key details. Their skirts, there are 400 pleats in their skirts, and that represents the 400 years of Ottoman occupation of Greece. And their shoes, the big heavy clogs, they have each between 60 and 120 nails in them, making those shoes weigh 3.5 kilos each. So when these guys do their march, which is a specific extending of the step before lowering, that's actually a huge amount of weight that they're carrying. These guys also have to remain absolutely immobile. They're only allowed to move every 15 minutes while they're on guard duty just to shift position. And they take this very seriously. It's part of their honor code. In 2001, one of their barrack houses caught fire during a protest, and the Evzone refused to move. And in 2010, when a bomb went off right here in the front of Parliament, the Evzoni still refused to abandon their post.
They usually fought as shock troops right up until the Second World War. Today they form the Presidential Guard and can be seen posted outside the palace, Parliament, and the tomb of the unknown soldier. While their role is now largely ceremonial, the weapons they carry are very real. If you're fortunate enough to be in Athens on a Sunday morning, then this square is the place to be. At 11 a.m. on the dot, there's an extended handover ceremony involving a large regiment of parading Evzones. Extended handover ceremony involving a large regiment of parading Evzones, accompanied by a military band, which is rather spectacular. Morning, then this square is the place to be. At 11 a.m. on the dot, there's an extended handover ceremony involving a large regiment of parading Evzones, accompanied by a military band, which is rather spectacular. Originally built for the Panathenaic Games back in 330 BC, the Panathenaic Stadium is mainly associated with the Olympics. Like so many of the great architectural structures of ancient Greece, it fell into ruin and was largely forgotten. With Greek independence in 1832, it was unearthed and restored completely in marble, becoming host to the first modern Olympics in the year 1896. In 2004, the Olympics returned to Athens, and while there were many new venues involved this time, the Panathenaic Stadium played host to the archery competition and the finish of men and women's marathons. Aside from ancient structures like the Acropolis, much of Athens was built after it became independent in 1832. The Plaka district, however, is the old town, built around the ancient Agora of Athens.
Another area you must explore when you're here in Athens is Plaka. It's the area to the right of the Agora, at the base of the Acropolis here. It's got a really interesting history. It was where a lot of the Ottomans lived when Greece was under Ottoman Turkish occupation, then abandoned during the Greek War of Independence, then repopulated in the early 19th century. And its name, Plaka, well, we're not really sure where it comes from. It may even just come from the fact that there was a plaque put up by one of the ancient Greek monuments in the area, the monument of Lysicrates. But today, it's a haven for great restaurants, cafes, little streets. Get lost in the area and just wander to your heart's content. And it really sums up something of the wonder that is the city of Athens for me. And whenever I come up here, I always think about a phrase by an ancient Greek called Heraclides that was his advice to visitors coming to this city. He said this, he said, "If you've seen Athens, you're a lucky man. If you've seen it and you haven't liked it, well, then you're an ass. And if you've seen it, you haven't liked it, and you don't want to come back, well, then you're a stupid ass."
Many recent archaeological discoveries have been made here, including the old Roman markets and Hadrian's library. Adriano Street, which runs right down the middle of the Plaka district, is the oldest street in Athens and one of the oldest in the world still in regular use. Today, the area has a distinctively Turkish feel to it, a vestige of the Ottoman Empire years. The Agora, which means gathering place or assembly, was the central meeting place in ancient Greek settlements. With 20 unique structures, it's one of the largest and best-known examples of its kind so far discovered.
Well, we've come to Areopagus Hill. Now, this used to be, in the ancient world, an aristocratic council place, but today it's a great view from which to see the beating heart of the ancient city of Athens. It's that space down there. That's the city's agora. It's the marketplace. It's where everyone came to do business, sell, buy, get their water, but also to do politics, to discuss, to talk philosophy, to move around the different stoas, the colonnaded buildings, meet up with their friends, catch up on the gossip, find out what was going on, and then march up either to the Acropolis to conduct some kind of religious ceremony, or else to the Pnyx to debate the next issue that the democracy would vote on.
Activities ranged from the athletic to the artistic and the spiritual. And there were markets held every day, not just for commerce, but for the exchange of ideas. Robust political debate was also a daily occurrence in the agora. In the late 6th century BC, the Athenians broke the power of the aristocrats, and for the first time in history, a single citizen, regardless of their status, could have a say in the running of the government. This was the humble beginnings of democracy. A key element of the new democratic process was freedom of speech. When your turn came in the agora, you stood on a simple block of stone called a bema, which means step. Just one step was all you needed to be seen and heard in an assembly of equals. One of the many structures of the ancient agora is the temple of Hephaestos. This dates back to the middle of the 5th century BC and contains the statues of both Hephaestos and Athena. It survived largely as it was originally built over 2,500 years ago. Hephaestos was the god of craftsmen and artisans, particularly blacksmiths. He was also a son of Zeus, and as blacksmith, made all the weapons for the gods of Olympus. While it was built as a pagan temple, from the Middle Ages onward, it became a Christian church. The other impressive building on the site is the Stoa of Attalus, the city's original shopping mall. Today it houses the Museum of the Ancient Agora. Though a modern reproduction, the building is so faithfully reconstructed that it's often used in the study of ancient monuments. The sheer size of the Stoa is overwhelming. But imagine how it would have looked surrounded by all the other structures of this immense agora. Though the city was small, its buildings were among the most impressive to be found in the ancient world.
This is Ermou Street that was laid out to lead from the Parliament building all the way down to Monasteraki and Thessia, two of the most vibrant areas of modern-day Athens. It's one of the busiest shopping streets in the city, but I prefer to get my goods from the street guys. Γεια σας, τι κάνετε, καλά είστε, καλά. Μπορώ να έχω ένα? Ναι. Ευχαριστώ. Πόσος είναι? 50? 50, έτσι, καλά. Ευχαριστώ. Γεια σου, γεια. These are damn tasty. Right in the middle of Ermou Street is this, the Church of Panagia Kapnikaria. Now, this place has been here definitely from before Ermou Street was ever even dreamed of. This church has been here since the 11th century. In fact, it's one of the oldest churches in Athens. And I love how it symbolizes the way Greece manages to mix the old and the new. This still today is the place that people come to sit down, relax, drink their coffee, eat an ice cream, talk, meet people, catch up, make up. It's the perfect mix of old and new.
The Greeks are also famous for their food. One of Greece's most popular takeaway foods, gyros, is cooked on a vertical spit. And these days, it's served with chips, if you're game. The Plaka district also has some wonderful places to eat and relax. For a modern taste of Athens, visit the Monasteraki district on any day.
Well, this is Monasteraki Square, where the youth of Athens congregate every day, every night. But it's also a place where everything about Greece comes together in one place. You've got, of course, the Acropolis behind me with the 5th century golden age buildings of the Parthenon and the Erechtheion. You can see the tall columns. That's the Library of Hadrian, built by the Roman Emperor Hadrian when he was turning this place into his city. And then right here, that's an Ottoman mosque from the era of the Ottoman occupation of Greece in the 18th century. It's now the Greek Museum of Folk Art. And over here, we've got a 10th century monastery, now a church speaking to the Orthodox Christian heritage of this country as well. And surrounding it all, every kind of food you can imagine, and of course, the flea markets of Athens. One word of warning if you want to go there. Everything is up for discussion, so take your bargaining skills with you. Good luck.
Here, the flea market is in full force, and amidst the usual tourist souvenirs, you can discover some genuine treasures. Though you may need to explore some of the lesser-traveled alleyways to find them.
Welcome to Dionysiou Areopagitou Street. This is one of my favorite places in Athens. Jump off at the Acropolis metro stop, grab a Fredo coffee or an orange juice, and take a walk through this pedestrianised walkway that circles round the Acropolis. You go past the Theatre of Dionysus, the home of drama, of theatre, where theatre began in the 5th century BC with the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides. And then make a beeline for the new Acropolis Museum, where the extraordinary sculptures that once stood on the Acropolis and in the Parthenon are now housed. When this museum was opened, it was an extraordinary moment. The old Acropolis Museum was up on top of the Acropolis, and somehow they had to move the sculptures from one to the other. And the way they decided to do it was this. They set up 2 enormous cranes, picked up a sculpture at a time, and swung them in the air hundreds of meters above our heads, and landed them in the new Acropolis Museum on the other side.
Built to house all the artifacts found on and around the sacred rock and housed in the original Acropolis Museum, the new Acropolis Museum opened in 2009. Constructed atop yet another unearthed archaeological site, the building was designed to the exact size of the Parthenon and offers great views back to the hill. Inside, you will find statues removed from the Erechtheion temple to protect them from damage by atmospheric pollution. These are constantly being laser cleaned and maintained with great care and precision. Also, 92 metopes depicting various battles, and the extensive frieze from the architraves of the Parthenon, which portrays the great Panathenaea festival in honor of the goddess Athena. These and other such rare artworks have all been replaced on site with replicas made of artificial stone. The Odeon of Herodes Atticus is still in use today. This remarkable arena, built in 161 AD, seats 5,000 people. Today, it's the main venue for the annual Athens Festival.
Welcome to the Theatre of Herodes Atticus, the Roman-era theatre here at the base of the Acropolis in Athens. And this place still hosts productions today, so book your tickets for when you're here in Athens. I've seen the English National Ballet, I've seen Twelfth Night, as well as some of the ancient Greek productions. It's an absolutely extraordinary experience to be sitting in a theatre that has been putting on shows for almost 2,000 years.
Herodes Atticus, one of the first and still remembered patron of the arts. Next door is an even bigger venue, the ancient Theatre of Dionysus. In its heyday, it could seat 17,000 people, and it was here that the plays of Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, and Aristophanes had their premieres. Indeed, Greek tragedy and the very concept of modern theatre was invented right here on this spot.
Well, what do we know about the Romans? We know they like building arches. And here's another absolute classic by the Emperor Hadrian, built in his honor when he came on an imperial tour to visit the city of Athens. But it holds a really quite cunning insight into how Hadrian saw this city. On one side of it, it says, "Welcome to the city of Theseus," one of the ancestral heroes of the Athenians. But on the other side, it says, "Welcome to the city of Hadrian." This was Hadrian's town. And a couple of years ago, I was having dinner with a member of the water board that runs the water system in modern-day Athens. And he actually told me that, in part, today, in the 21st century, Athens still depends on the water pipes put down by Hadrian in the 2nd century AD. This really is still Hadrian's city. And in front of me, connected with the arch, is another of the Hadrianic building projects in ancient Athens. This is the Temple of Zeus. Now, this was begun back in the 6th century BC, but it was so big in its concept that no Greek for centuries was actually able to finish it. It took Hadrian in the 2nd century AD, with his imperial power, muscle, money, and might, to come along and finish this temple. Talk about a project over time and over budget. And it was here, to the Temple of Zeus, that in 2007, a group of modern Greeks came and won the right to conduct services in honor of the ancient Greek pagan god Zeus. The ancient Greek gods are alive once again.
In many ways, it was the greatest white elephant of the Roman Empire. Even Aristotle disdained it as hubris. It was not until 132 AD that Hadrian finally completed the massive project intended to be the greatest temple of the ancient world. A massive statue of Zeus occupied the cella or inner chamber of the temple. In many ways, it was the greatest white elephant of the Roman Empire. Even Aristotle disdained it as hubris. It was not until 132 AD that Hadrian finally completed the massive project intended to be the greatest temple of the ancient world. A massive statue of Zeus occupied the cella or inner chamber of the temple. The temple stood for barely 100 years before it was badly damaged by barbarians in 267 AD. Since then, it's been left to ruin, its stones quarried to build churches and other structures throughout the medieval era. Only 15 of the 104 columns remain standing, with the 16th on the ground, felled during a storm in 1852. Of course, the city wouldn't be a Roman's home away from home without a public bath, and Athens had its fair share of these. The ruins of Roman baths are located right alongside the temple of Olympian Zeus, with more just a short walk away. Even the spectacular national gardens have played a pivotal role in Greece's history. In 1920, King Alexander was bitten by a monkey while walking the gardens and died of sepsis 3 weeks later. This caused a chain of disastrous political repercussions, prompting Winston Churchill to write, "It is perhaps no exaggeration to remark that 250,000 persons died of this monkey's bite." But of course, the one thing Athens is most famous for is the Acropolis. This ancient citadel dominates the city, and it has existed in one form or another since well before the Romans and Alexander. Though its structures were occasionally damaged in times of war, the victors always saw to their restoration, sometimes adding their own ill-conceived additions. These have since been removed and the site restored to its original state as much as possible.
If the Agora was the beating heart of Athens, then the Acropolis was its head. This always, from the very earliest period of Athens' history, was the center of the city. Up here was the palace of the first Mycenaean kings. And in the centuries after that, it turned from palaces to temples, temples to the patron deity of the city, the goddess Athena. And of course, of all those temples, the most famous is the Parthenon. Built in the 5th century BC, at the heyday of the Athenian democracy and the Athenian Empire, everything you can see there today, the proper lyre, the entrance gate, the entranceway, the Parthenon behind it, all was part of what's known as the Periclean building program. The building program led by an Athenian politician called Pericles that was to symbolize the extraordinary achievements of this extraordinary city.
There were once 21 individual structures to the Acropolis. Some of these are now nothing more than ruined foundations, but dominating the site are the Parthenon, the Odeon of Herodes Atticus, and the Theatre of Dionysus. The Parthenon was a temple dedicated to Athena, who was of course patron to the city named after her. It's the single most important surviving building from classical Greece and a monument to Athenian democracy and civilization, despite being converted at different times into a church and then a mosque. Of all the legacies this ancient culture has given us, these are perhaps the most enduring and profound. Named after the sun god, Erechtheus, and completed in 420 BC, the Erechtheion stands on the exact spot where Athena was said to have planted her olive tree. These particular 5 statues served as columns on the smaller Erechtheion temple up on the Acropolis.
The Parthenon, the temple that sits on the Acropolis today, is still the most famous monument of Greece. It says Greece to the rest of the world. My favorite fact about it is this, that there's not a single straight line in the Parthenon. Because 2,500 years ago, the engineers and architects who constructed it understood that if they did build it with exactly straight lines, it would actually look to us wonky. 2,500 years ago, they were able to understand that and correct for the optical illusion just enough, with every line just slightly curved, so that it looks to us straight. But while today what we see on the Acropolis is very much 5th century Athens, of course, building on this extraordinary place didn't stop in the 5th century. This is a place that has seen centuries of history, of civilization, of people coming and going across this land. And today, it still stands proud after 2,500 years.
The 3 bedrocks of ancient Greece that define what it means to be civilized can all be found on this one site: democracy, peaceful athletic competition, and theatre and poetry. Looking down across the ancient agora from the Acropolis, the sheer size is particularly apparent. The Temple of Hephaestus can be seen on the left, and the most prominent ruins in the center of this view are of the Odeon of Agrippa, which was built in 15 BC. Over the centuries, the agora was gradually abandoned and eventually built over, becoming a residential area. When excavations for the Athens to Piraeus rail line started in 1890, some of the first ruins were uncovered. It's said you can't dig a hole in Athens without hitting something of historical value. Well, this was certainly the case when constructing the new underground metro system for the city. Progress was slowed many times as they uncovered more than 50,000 ancient relics and fossils. Some of these were carefully excavated and can be seen on display in 6 of the metro stations, turning the stations into a museum for commuters. Here, in Syntagma Station, you can see the layers of ancient history on full display, as the excavations were left exposed behind glass for everyone to see. Aside from the architecture of ancient Greece, there are, of course, countless smaller relics and treasures that have been unearthed over the years. And it takes more than a few museums to preserve and house them all, with 28 in central Athens alone. Among these is the Cycladic Art Museum, which offers a great insight into everyday life of the ancient world. Starting in 3000 BC and the early Bronze Age, it leads the visitor through the Dark Ages into the classical, Hellenistic, and Roman periods, with vases, jewelry, sculptures, coins, and much more. The best thing, though, is how it's presented in such a fun and informative way. History brought to life. Then there's the National Archaeological Museum, the biggest in Athens, and it's fair to say one of the most important in the world, with thousands of relics from the prehistoric, Cycladic, and Neolithic eras. Among its standout treasures is the bronze statue of Poseidon, or Zeus. We're not quite sure which god it is, as he's either throwing a discus or a lightning bolt. And the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient analog computer dating from around 200 BC that could predict the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Of course, for visitors to Athens, some modern-day comforts are to be expected. Many of the hotels offer commanding views of the Acropolis, Agora, Plaka, and other sites, all within walking distance. Athens is constantly evolving, whether it be the old or new, showcased in the many styles of hotels within the city. The Hotel Grande Bretagne is perfectly placed right opposite Syntagma Square and Parliament. It became so popular with visiting celebrities, politicians, and even royalty that it became known as the Greek state's official guest house. Rooftop dining, be it breakfast or dinner, offers magnificent views of the Acropolis. The aptly named New Hotel is 3 minutes walk from Syntagma Square. It's been brilliantly renewed from the rundown old 60s hotel, the Olympic Palace, transforming it into an intriguing establishment where every public space and floor includes remnants of the original. The architects cleverly repurposing elements from the old into the new constructions with fascinating results. And it was in the New Art Lounge, the rooftop bar and restaurant of the new hotel, we caught up with Nigel McGilchrist, author of 20 books exploring 70 Greek islands, a lifetime's body of work.
So Nigel, tell me a little bit about how you came to live in Greece.
Well, I think that, there's something in destiny that brings you here. I came at the age of 17 the first time. And I remember thinking, why did nobody tell me that life could be like this, that food could be wonderful, that the weather could be wonderful, that the life didn't need to be the grey English phenomenon. But it's more than that. It's about actually the Mediterranean being a sea in the middle of 3 continents. It's like a piazza, if you like, or square in which Africa and Asia and Europe all meet. And I think you feel that more intensely in Greece.
And I mean, I think you're absolutely right, isn't it? That when we think of the Greek islands, we think of a holiday destination for the sea, the sand, the good food.
That's a modern perception.
It's a modern perception, and I've been struck in reading your books just quite how much, again, of the history each island encapsulates Greece, and how much each island has its own unique take on the world as a result of where it has been in the Aegean, and as a result what forces and worlds and peoples have come across it, and that you can have some islands that feel entirely Greek, some islands that have this extraordinary Italian feel to it as well, some that much more kind of Turkish or Asian feel to and there's an extraordinary mix of cultures all in this small cluster of pieces of rock in the Aegean, isn't it?
The variety is astonishing, absolutely astonishing, it really is. They are stepping stones literally between Asia and Europe, and one forgets that they were a passageway, and not just between Europe and Asia, but also between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and between North Africa and Asia. I mean, so it's a real crossroads. That's what gives them their extraordinary interest and depth of history, as you say.
And I have to ask you this question, though. Having travelled through so many of them, got to know them so well, what if you had to pick your top 5 favourite islands, or favourite things to do on islands, or favourite places to go?
That's a tough one.
What would you say? What would you say?
That's a very, very difficult one, precisely because of the variety that we've just talked about. There are islands that are historically dense, like Rhodes and Samos. There are islands with great sort of noble architecture, like Symi, Syros, with this lovely neoclassical. So there are so many ways of approaching the islands, so many ways of choosing them. And then there are some that are absolutely, unique in the world. Santorini is a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So there's something for everyone.
It's a nice way of thinking about it.
I'm avoiding your question.
Yeah, no, but you can find whatever it is you want, whatever it is you like.
You can match.
Find something which...
Absolutely.
the Aegean has an island for every personality.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And
yeah.
I mean, you spoke about the island culture and the island mentality. Obviously, Greece has been going through a very difficult period over the last couple of years. What would you say the experience for you has been someone sort of moving through Greece, but also what do you think the experience of that time has been from an island perspective?
The more one knows about Greek history, and particularly island history, one realizes how resilient the Greeks are. Incredibly, when the islands and the cities of the mainland have been shaken again and again and again to the ground by earthquakes. And the capacity of the Greeks and the islanders above all else to pick themselves up and reconstruct life is extraordinary. So in the very long term, I'm not worried about what will happen with Greeks because there is an immense resilience here and they're exceptionally resourceful people, and this is a bad moment, but it will pass.
And we were talking to a young Greek up in Thessaloniki and asked him about his advice for people coming to Greece, perhaps for the first time, exploring into the city. And his piece of advice was, don't hesitate. Get involved, talk to the locals, find friends. And I think that's something that often visitors to a country, particularly to Greece, different language, different culture, different way of being and interacting, can find quite hard to break through that barrier and engage. What would be your a piece of advice to people visiting Greece for the first time?
Greeks are mad, and they're mad in the best sense of the word. I mean, they can be madly generous. They can be madly obtuse as well. They can block you in various things, but they can also be madly generous. There's something, you have to accept. It comes out of nowhere with Greece, and you have to be able to accept that, really.
And go with it and
enjoy
it,
because it's a very particular characteristic.
Well,
they can be absurd.
What a fantastic note to end on. I think Styliamas.
Styliamas.
Thank you.
Athens also serves as the jumping-off point for a number of day trips around the Aegean Sea. Heading out from the port of Piraeus, local Sylvia Klimaki will be our guide for two stunning locations, Poros and Hydra. The island of Poros is a popular weekend destination for those staying in Athens. Throughout antiquity, it's been a major maritime port for various invaders and was once the center of the cult of Poseidon and the Calorian League, a powerful confederation of several cities in the region.
This is the picturesque village of mainland Greece, Galatas. But as you can see, I'm standing on the gorgeous island of Poros. It is 2 minutes from the mainland by these boat taxis. Poros is very famous for its water ski school. Athenians and tourists come here to enjoy all sorts of water sports. The island of Poros hosts the International Yacht Symposium each May. Brokers from all over the world gather here to showcase their yachts for chartering in the Greek market.
Poros has an impressive clock tower, well worth braving the steep walk to the top for its spectacular views. Water taxis shuttle visitors to and from the mainland. Poros also played a vital role in recent history. In 1828, there was the Protocol of Poros, a meeting between France, Russia, and Britain, who all had an interest in Greece's independence. This established the new Kingdom of Greece. But it wasn't until the Battle of Poros, 3 years later, when the islands of Hydra and Poros tried to assert their own independence, and failed, that a truly independent Greece was finally established.
So we're leaving the island of Poros, heading towards one of my favorite Greek islands in the Saronic, a very famous island called Hydra.
Unlike Poros, the island of Hydra had gone largely unnoticed by history until the 18th century, when it became a major trading port in the region. It was during these prosperous years the spectacular port and many impressive mansions were built. Its name comes from water springs, supposedly found on the island, though ironically, water supply has often been scarce for the inhabitants.
So here we are in the beautiful, idyllic Hydra, the place that thankfully stopped in time.
For centuries, it seems Hydra has offered a simple, uncomplicated life. Close to mainland Greece, but remote enough to offer genuine solitude and tranquility.
This is one of my favorite weekend escapes. I leave busy Athens to come here to relax with friends and family. Although very closely located to Athens, Hydra remains one of the very few Greek islands where cars are prohibited. So if you visit Hydra and you want to go to your hotel or favorite restaurant, you should take a bike, or if you feel adventurous, a donkey.
No motor vehicles are permitted on the island, no cars.
Although very closely located to Athens, Hydra remains one of the very few Greek islands where cars are prohibited. So if you visit Hydra and you want to go to your hotel or favorite restaurant, you should take a bike, or if you feel adventurous, a donkey.
No motor vehicles are permitted on the island, no cars or motorbikes. Perhaps this austere existence is what has attracted so many artists to live here. Among them, the famous Greek artist Nikos Nikolaou and songwriter Leonard Cohen. It's also meant the city is the best preserved example of an ancient way of life, no longer found in modern Greece. The island played a pivotal role in Greece's War of Independence, supplying many of the ships for the Greek Navy. But this generosity was ultimately their undoing. They never quite recovered economically and have returned to the simple lifestyle that had been their way centuries before.
This is the statue of Admiral Andreas Miaoulis, a leading figure during the Greek War of Independence against the Ottoman Empire. In 1821, the fleets of Hydra and of the two other naval islands, Psara and Spetses, played out a very critical role in our nation's fight for independence.
At the southernmost tip of the Attica Peninsula on mainland Greece is Cape Sounion.
In ancient times, this was the headland where sailors and ships coming from the Aegean would first start to turn and make their way towards Athens and the port of Athens, the Piraeus. As a result, this was the first place that Athens could make a statement of its incredible ability, power, magnitude, and might to the world. And make a statement they did. It's the temple right there on top of the cape behind me. A temple to Poseidon, the god of the sea. And it had been standing there since at least the 6th century BC. But when the Persians invaded Greece in the early 5th century and swept through Attica, destroying everything in their path, they also destroyed the temple here. And it was over 50 years before the Athenians came back to rebuild. By this time, they had not only defeated the Persians, they were now at the head of their own mighty empire. And now they were ready, prepared, and able to make an even better and bigger statement than ever before. It was all part of a coordinated program. A new temple to Poseidon here, the Parthenon on the Acropolis, and a number of other temples scattered throughout their territory. Now, this temple has had many famous visitors, including, in the 19th century, one famous English poet, Lord Byron, who came to Greece, fell in love with Greece, wrote about Greece, and died fighting for Greece in the Greek War of Independence. Now, on the one hand, he did something we really don't agree with today. He fell in love with the temple here at Sunion so much that he decided to inscribe his name on one of the columns. You'll get in a lot of trouble if you try to do that today. But on the other, he did something which we can appreciate more today. He wrote a few lines of poetry about his feelings of being here at Sunion. And here they are. Place me on Sunion's marbled step, when nothing else save the waves and I may hear over our mutual murmurs sweep. There, swan-like, let me sing and die. Well, if you've got to die, it's a pretty good place to go.
When you've had enough of visiting the ruins, stay the night and explore the local towns along the coast. This is one of the most expensive parts of Greece to live, and boasts some of the best restaurants and hotels in the country.
If you make the trip down to Cape Sunion, take a pew, sit down, and wait for sunset. There are few places quite like it on Earth from which to watch the sun go down.